Welcome back, and you're still watching The Globe on SABC News. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, to look at all the main stories and issues that gripped the African continent, we have since re-established connection with Advocate Sipho Mantula, a researcher at the Thabo Mbeki School of Public and International Affairs at UNISA. Advocate, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you can hear me now. A very warm welcome.
Evening to you, Sipho, evening to the viewers, Jumbo Africa.
All right, as I stated earlier on, it seems like we do have a stalemate in Mali as ECOWAS is now demanding an immediate transfer of power to civilian rule, while the military leaders are not so keen on, as they want to stay on in power for the next 3 years.
Definitely, Sipho, but if we look at the history and the genesis of the Malian crisis, you remember that 8 years ago, the same military junta took power by force. And for the last 12 days, the way you have outlined that when the meeting happened on the 18th of August, there was this cry from the military that, yes, we will go for an early elections, but we will not transfer power to the civilian authority. But now ECOWAS have been very clear that they will never allow any military coups in that region. Remember, there were many cases that came from ECOWAS region, like the case of Ouagadougou, the case of Gambia. There were many cases that came where ECOWAS was very clear about the military power. I mean, the military appetite of power. And now you can see now with the current talks that have taken place since Friday, ECOWAS was still once more saying that, but you need to transfer power to the civilian authorities, and which is your opposition parties. A similar case study of Sudan and even Khartoum 1 year ago. So in Mali, again, what we see the issue of not only the collapse of the talks, but the failure of ECOWAS can insist its own policies and principles on this so-called military coup or the mutiny that happened.
And the transfer of power to civilian rule will only take place, I suppose, through elections. And elections, for them to take place, there has to be a constitution in place under this dispensation. And for a constitution, there has to be a wide-ranging referendum, which could possibly take months. And now the ECOWAS and the international community is demanding immediate transfer of power to civilian rule. Clearly, this is a recipe for disaster and further turmoil in the country.
No, definitely, Sipho. The issue of electoral body to be formed is very critical. And the other aspect is, as you know, that ECOWAS have said that you need to have at least a civilian authority that can prepare for those elections within a year. Remember that Keita was only there for almost 2 years. Their next elections are going to happen in 2023. Now you are being pushed to have elections in 2021, probably end of 2021. And the issue of transfer of power through the bullet will never happen anymore in Africa. There is a need to now transfer power through the ballot where people can have their choice. You will remember that even the June 5 movement has been insisting on the cry of what happened in March during the local government elections. Because when you trace and track all the challenges in Mali, they were around elections. So you need to make sure, again, that you don't go for the faulty or for the elections that will be questioned once more.
Well, if the figures that we've been getting and if the visuals that we've been seeing over the past few weeks of Malians taking to the streets in celebration of the ouster of former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita are anything to go by, then I suppose then it will be a very, very difficult task for ECOWAS to implement a successful, a transition to civilian rule, because the Malians, as the main stakeholders, are in celebration of or are in support of the ouster of Mr. Keita. And then what would ECOWAS do then, to ensure that civilian rule is in fact ineffected?
You know, as you know, that those talks have been having challenges. ECOWAS have insisted on the issue around that you need to have a civilian rule. And secondly, they will only allow them, because remember that Mali it is now under sanctions, both through ECOWAS and AU, and there is a pressure to say that release the former president, which they have already acceded to. But the issue again is that even if you have the opposition parties agreeing with the military, the only challenge that we'll be having again is the same case of Zimbabwe of 2017, when you had the military out there, opposition being happy, but at a later stage, the same opposition laments and even complains about the military rule. So I think the issue of ECOWAS is to, like I have said, insist on their standard ground rules that they have already done in other countries. You'll remember that ECOWAS has been engaged in Mali for some time. This is not for the first time ECOWAS is mediating in Mali, as well as the African Union. You will remember that even the African Union chairperson, President Ramaphosa, came out very strong about the question of Mali. The chairperson of ECOWAS as well came out very clear about what should happen in Mali. So I think it is the issue of the military trying to delay this issue of allowing transition to happen peacefully and as well through the popular participation of the opposition parties.
Let's now move on to the 40th SADC summit, which has come and gone without, of course, discussing some of the key challenges faced by the region, including the insurgency in Mozambique and the crisis that is currently brewing in Zimbabwe. Was the summit just another evidence of just how toothless the regional body has become?
You know, since we were unmasking, as we are putting our mask on this COVID-19, unmasking the SADC summit that happened virtually for the first time, we saw a transfer of chairmanship in both instances. Let me take you through the one from Tanzania to Mozambique. And as you have already alluded, Cabo Delgado, it is on the brink of a conflict going on there. And then we have Zimbabwe, chairperson of the Troika, Emmerson Mnangagwa, handing over to Gaborone. The question that you are raising of Zimbabwe not being raised in that summit, it was obvious because of the conflict of interest that Zimbabwe was having. Actually, you have the love letter being sent out by the SADC community telling that under President Mnangagwa, the organ have achieved relative stability in the region, which is not true. We know that DRC Congo as well, it is having challenges in the east. The issue of Cabo Delgado, the issue of Zambia, the issues of Malawi, including Zimbabwe itself, there were issues there. Again, the SADC summit, they were just talking about the 2050 vision, which is very important because regional economic bodies have to be strong so that they can give support to the AU. I think another aspect that the SADC fails to deal with, the way you have raised it is the question of Zimbabwe that has been on the news for almost 2 weeks. The question again of the COVID-19 scandals that we've been seeing in the SADC region, how the COVID gate scandals that have been hitting Zimbabwe, South Africa, it was silent on it. And I think that's where, as you were saying, it was just a meeting of the heads of state of SADC, usually, where they were not meeting physically in Mozambique, and some of the issues could not be discussed online because of the security reasons.
So what do you suggest that SADC does, or how would you suggest that SADC handles this particular crisis in Zimbabwe? Should it still continue with that so-called silent treatment or the quiet diplomacy in the spirit of respecting that country's sovereignty?
You know, one other aspect that I think Zimbabwe can be rescued is the active civil society voice and the united voices that will come from Zimbabwe. But at the same time, for Zimbabwe to even respect its own constitutional democratization space that they have agreed on 7 years ago. Remember that Zimbabwe in 2013 had a new constitution. When President Emmerson Mnangagwa was inaugurated in 2018, he has emphasized 2 areas, the rule of law and the respect for human rights. Thinking of SADC out of my head, I think SADC has been overtaken by events. And I think SADC's data or thinking capacity has collapsed as well, because you don't have efficient even SADC national committees in this region. You don't have the SADC voices that come from women and children and youth. Actually, we have leaders meeting at the SADC level, You've got secretaries at the SADC level who are not doing nothing in Gaborone. And that's why we are having the challenge of SADC being seen as a toothless regional economic body. Even within the SADC, there is no what you call the Human Rights Forum or tribunal or the court that could be dealing with such issues. So SADC, it is not effective, and it's not learning from your ECOWAS, it's not learning from IGAD, it is not learning from COMESA, because they have to learn from other regional economic bodies about how are they dealing with human rights issues, how are they dealing with political and security issues. Hence, you see the issue of Cabo Delgado. They have lost their thinking around it. The issue of DRC Congo, the issues around Malawi, Zambia. So you can see that how SADC has been crafted, even if it is the frontline state. Something it is wrong with SADC, and I think it's high time that SADC must have the voice of the people who are part of the SADC National Committee. South Africa itself doesn't have a SADC civil society component. Actually, you have the state-to-state relation. Hence, you can see that Zimbabwe, there was the envoy sent from this country to go to Zimbabwe. And those envoys were not given the voice to meet with the ordinary people. And when the SADC met, there was no sharing of even such notes. To say, South Africa as the chair of the AU, what were your role and impact that you have done to try to resolve the long-standing issues of Zimbabwe, which might be very complex.
And one unfortunate thing, Advocate, is that this kind of a conversation we've been having for years as to why South Africa is certainly sort of turning a blind eye to Zimbabwe, why the SADC is turning a blind eye to Zimbabwe, why is the African Union, which South Africa is currently the chair of, turning a blind eye in Zimbabwe. And I suppose then it's only prudent that we start diagnosing the problem in greater detail. For instance, pre-colonial societies, Advocate, were characterized by non-competitive politics. I mean, competition for power was not only illegitimate, but fatal, as it were. And often those who sought power had to found their own polity elsewhere. And could this be the reason why the Zimbabwean political elite looks at political competition with open hostility, as it were?
No, definitely. One challenge in Zimbabwe that you must understand is what I've called militarization and securitization of politics in that country. And secondly, you understand that then former President Thabo Mbeki last year, most of us, even on this show, we even spoke about his visit to Harare. And it was one of the areas of the SADC mission to go and understand the issues in Zimbabwe, because the issue of the national dialogue, yes, can be a solution, but we have the issues in Zimbabwe of the transitional justice that have not happened. They might have the TRC processes that they were aiming to undergo, but they again have been overtaken by events. You'll understand Cyclone Idai have hit Zimbabwe, economic crunch have hit Zimbabwe, the issues even around sanctions that, what the others will call them stupid sanctions that have challenged Zimbabwe. And again, you have the issue around corruption, Cynthia. But for South African SADC and AU to be close to Zimbabwe, it's part of our international solidarity pillar. It is part of us having been involved with Zimbabwe for many years on the liberation struggle. And again, it is the role of the frontline state for Tanzania, for countries like Zambia, Namibia, South Africa, to be very understanding and not take sides on the issue of Zimbabwe, simply because for Zimbabwe to be on the brink of collapse again is the issue of always sugarcoating and being very quiet, not to engage with the leaders of even that country. And you'll understand Zimbabwe is going through a lot post the coup or the not coup, but even post the elections that were being contested in 2018. So that's how Zimbabwe is so complex in the eyes even of the regional bodies.
Right. Let's change focus now, shall we, Advocate, and move further north, where Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt have yet to reach an agreement over the dam. And this is obviously straining the relations in the Nile River Basin.
Cynthia, this is one of the longest conflicts. It's almost a decade, if you remember the Nile Basin summit that was held by the upper streams. We normally want to talk about these three countries tripartite. We say Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, but you have other countries like Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, you have other countries that have a vested interest in this, what we call hydropolitics or hydro diplomacy. And the war conflict that we see coming from Egypt and Sudan is to only threaten Ethiopia that have already invested in two forms. They have put their investment in that Nile Basin through their bonds. They have put their investment in that Nile Basin spiritually now, so you can see how Ethiopia has taken this Nile Basin project so seriously that they will want to deal with two things again. Electrification, which is the energy power, because there is always power cut and power failure in that country. And secondly, it is for survival. As we know that water, it is for life. There is no way countries can survive without water. And this water conflict has been embroiled by the AU under South Africa's chairmanship and even mediation. But as well, the international community or Norway, USA had an interest in this Nile Basin conflict. And again, you have the crisis that comes from international law. Why are we still using the 1929 and the 1950s treaties that Ethiopia had been saying that, but those treaties, we were not part of them. They are null and void for us. So you can understand that when you talk of the right to use natural resource cannot be only aligned to the two major countries, which is Egypt and Sudan, when actually those two countries have been going through a military turmoil. And Ethiopia has been thriving through the time of the late Meles Zenawi. That's how this great renaissance then came about, and it was for the benefit of the whole continent. And I think that's where Egypt and Sudan have missed that point of dealing with the same crisis of the Nile Basin.
I mean, these three countries have been holding talks for years without reaching a deal, with Ethiopia wanting to fill the dam's reservoir, but Egypt saying no, that could significantly reduce its Nile River. Clearly, all the countries do not believe that they are responsible, or they do not take responsibility for the brewing crisis in the Nile River Basin. So which country is wrong? How should this crisis be handled?
This crisis will only be handled by allowing, obviously, the way I have put it, bring the upper stream and the lower stream countries to can engage. Don't only allow those who claim historic usage of the use of the Nile through international laws, when actually there was something that came out in Kampala about the collective usage and even beneficiaries of what you can call people who will be able to benefit, those who are farmers, those who are even people who are on energy sector. But what you are having in the crisis is, if you remember, the same foreign affairs minister, the late Boutros Ghali, spoke about this issue that the next conflict in Africa will be around the waters. But the water crisis that we see ourselves, it is the only greed that comes from Egypt and Sudan, because most of the people who are even benefiting from those water reservoirs were the main people in Sudan and Egypt, not the ordinary people. But Addis Ababa has already built the dam. They've already benefited with the dam. Also, there was rain that has already came through in that country in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So the issue around the water crisis is to understand that we need to understand the hydropolitics of water, that it will even date back that Ethiopia initially had the right of this water because the water of the Nile comes from Ethiopia in pure. For us to be very not clear about who has the right or who has not the right, Ethiopia has emphasized that, but the main source of the Nile, it is both from Ethiopia and from Uganda, not from Egypt and from Sudan. And that is not only theoretically, that is proven, one can say, naturally, geographically, in terms where this Nile water comes from. And I think that's where we should understand the power of water in terms of electrifying Africa. You have a case study in Kinshasa, DRC, of the Congo Basin. We have messed up that project as well, of using the Congo Basin project to make Africa to be bigger and to have more power and to have more energy resource.
Okay. Let's move on to Central Africa now, shall we, Advocate, wherein hundreds of Burundian refugees living in Rwanda currently return home this past week after years in exile. This surely points to the possibility, perhaps, of normalizing relations between Burundi and Rwanda.
I've lost you.
Come again, Advocate?
I've lost you.
Okay, I want us to talk about, the Central African issues now, wherein we do understand that hundreds of Burundian refugees currently living in Rwanda have returned home this past week after years in exile. And I suppose then it surely points to the possibility of normalizing relations between Burundi and Rwanda.
I'm losing you, Sipho.
Okay, yeah, it does appear that we are really struggling to get that line to you very clearly, Advocate. But then thank you so much for your, for your insightful analysis of the African continental issues that made headlines the past week. We appreciate your time.